And we will, there we go. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Ari Taylor, and I am the coalition manager for the Quentin Palford campaign. I am so excited to be part of this particular campaign because I know that Quentin will truly represent the people of Massachusetts.
This at all.
Watch both.
Then why am I wasting my time?
I'm gonna watch both.
I am going to go ahead and mute everybody, or Ben, if you can mute. We'll mute all. There we go. Okay. So again, my name is Ari Taylor, and I am the coalition's manager for Quentin Palfrey. I am extremely excited to be part of this campaign, and this campaign in particular, because I know that Quentin will truly represent the people of Massachusetts, not the special interest groups, but all of us, especially the voters. He has shown this in his work with the voter protection program. And as activists, as a lot of us are, we know that one of the most important things we need to do right now is activate our communities and our organizations. So we are hoping that by you being here tonight, you will learn why we are supporting Quentin and why you should be supporting Quentin. And I am going to start the program. Our first speaker is actually a video from Coco Allensu. Coco devotes himself to social justice, HIV/AIDS prevention, LGBT youth, and culture and arts. He's received recognition both nationally and internationally for his tireless work. He served as executive director of the North Shore Alliance of GLBT Youth, NAGLY, for 10 years. And he is the first Filipino counselor in Massachusetts, as well as the first openly gay counselor in Lynn. He was unable to join us tonight, but he did send us this video. So I hope you will enjoy this message from Coco.
Hello, everyone. My name is Constantino Coco Alinsog. I am a Democratic state member of the Massachusetts Democratic Party, and last year became the first ever Filipino American city councilor in New England, and the first out gay man city councilor in the history of the great city of Lynn. It is my great honor and privilege to endorse my good friend Quentin Palfrey. I've known Quentin for quite some time. If ever I need something, he is always there to help, and has done a lot to help me and my husband Peter. And that is why for his run to be our next Attorney General, I will always be there for you, Quentin. There is no need for me to tell you how amazing this guy's career in public service. You all know this. But one thing a few of you that really don't know about Quentin is that he is a very genuine, sincere, and dedicated individual. And I could not think of any other person to be in that position but my good friend Quentin. Good luck to you. We're all here rooting for you and helping you along the way.
Thank you to Coco. Hopefully he'll be able to join us another evening for Quentin. At this time, I am going to introduce you to Zelda McGregor. Zelda is a political operative who has been working in progressive candidate and issue campaign advocacy for 20 years. She is the chair of the Upper Cape Progressive Mass, a chapter of Progressive Mass, and an elected member of the Mass Dem State Committee since 2013. Zelda lives in Falmouth on the Cape with her two cats, Phil and Eugene. Take it away.
I got to get the girls in there because everyone knows that my weird cats are a big part of Mapley. So speaking of Mapley, I've known Quentin now since he ran for lieutenant governor in 2018. And as he texted to remind me today, and also Time Hop reminded me, just 4 years ago, I guess, we were in Plymouth at a gun violence, a prevention of gun violence rally. And recently I was in Plymouth with Quentin protesting Holtec's egregious plans to dump radioactive water into our bay. So Quentin and I have a long past of protesting together in Plymouth, and I look forward to him bringing that same electrifying energy into everything that he'll do as our next Attorney General. One of those things is his fierce advocacy for public education, K through uni. It's something that should be available to people. It should be safe, and it shouldn't bankrupt us to have it. We need to focus, and Quentin knows this, so I'm not going to say it as well as he will eventually, but he has this long history of fighting for that. He recently wrote a wonderful thing about not expanding charter schools in Massachusetts on Medium, which I didn't have time to get the link to paste in the chat, but I'll do it after I'm done babbling, Quentin. But I trust Quentin on that. He's the only candidate running for this office on our side or in any other who has this history of protecting people's rights to a quality public education that everyone thinks is perfect in Massachusetts, but we know isn't. And that there are a lot of equity gaps here. There's no one I trust more than Quentin to address that as an attorney general and to stop some of the really frightening things that charter schools can and do in our communities, mostly affecting people who don't look like me. And that's not right either. So this is a not delicate way of saying, or not very well put way of saying, that we just have to have someone who's an advocate for our public schools and is not deeply invested in the charter school conundrum. So Quentin, for that reason and for so many others, I will be delighted to continue working to bring all my progressive ladies and gentledoms with me through this process. And I just am so proud of you and so grateful for your work and the sacrifice it is to run for this office. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zelda. Up next, I am very pleased to introduce Michelle Mullet. Michelle is an artist and activist living in North Reading. She was recently appointed as commissioner for the Upper Middlesex Commission on the Status of Women. So I am going to hand it over to Michelle to tell you about why she's supporting Quentin.
Thank you, Ari. And good evening, citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My name is Michelle Mullet, and I am overjoyed to be here to support my friend and fellow progressive Democrat, Quentin Palfrey, for Attorney General. You know, I met Quentin back in 2018 at the Mass Democratic State Convention. He was standing outside trying to catch voters as they walked by. So I stopped to talk to him, and within minutes, we were talking about the border wall, immigration, and families being separated. We talked for a while, probably too long if he had his campaign manager. But I walked into the convention thinking, that guy seems important. That guy seems like he probably knows more than he's letting on. But more important than that, I felt like I had made a friend. So fast forward to today, I'm once again a delegate and Quentin is a candidate, but a lot has happened since then. As most of you know, I ran for state rep during the worst possible time in American history. It was a pandemic. It was a global supply chain shutdown. I mean, I'll just call it, it was apocalyptic. But I persisted. And the only reason I finished my race was because I had a few dedicated individuals who supported me when everyone else dismissed me. And Quentin was one of those steadfast supporters. And I'm so grateful for that. While I was running, Quentin helped connect me with, elected officials, and he directed me to resources. But most importantly, he believed in me when many people thought I would just quit. So I want you to think about the other candidates for a minute. There's a lot of talk about Quentin running against 2 female candidates, and I'd like to address that directly. Because as a Native American and Latina who ran for office, I'm supporting Quentin because he does the work with a capital W. He is the boots on the ground, let me make a phone call or a donation to help women of color run for office. And I am living proof of that. So I never heard from these other attorney general candidates from the time I was pulling papers through election day. And it's one thing for nonprofits and elected officials to have mission statements about supporting women of color. It's easy to say out loud, but he shows up. But Quentin isn't about mission statements or sound bites. He shows up when others disregard you. He listens when others are busy scanning the room looking for someone more important to talk to. And honestly, he is one of the kindest people I've met on the campaign trail. So in closing, I have a question for you. Do you want candidates that are self-funded and only concerned about the constituents in their backyard? Or do you want an attorney general who has worked diligently for years to protect voter rights and consumer rights? Someone who has personally and professionally collaborated with more than 200 community leaders across this great state of Massachusetts. I support Quentin Palfrey for Attorney General because he understands how different communities need different resources, and he knows that we are stronger when we embrace those differences. Quentin knows Western Mass just as well as the Cape and Boston. And that's what's most important when we look for a strong, progressive leader to bring our entire state into a sustainable, diverse, and prosperous future. So if you're looking for a driven, effective, and compassionate new leader on Beacon Hill, then you should vote for Quentin Palfrey for Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Well, I don't know what more we could possibly say. If you weren't already Team Quentin before, I think that would definitely get me on board. And I hope it will get all of you on board. But we know that this work is hard, and we have challenges ahead of getting the word out there across all of Massachusetts. So if you know you're definitely Team Quentin, I'm going to have Ben drop in the chat how to get involved, how to help us spread the word to your friends, neighbors, family, social media. If you can make a donation, those are always welcome. I don't think anybody here is shy to how campaigns run and how they work. But if you can sign up, make calls, and really just share on social media. Let's amplify this message. Let's get it out there, because this is who we need in our Attorney General's office. So with that being said, I am now going to introduce you to Quentin himself so he can tell you why he's running for AG and what his main issues are. And welcome, Quentin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ari, and thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Zelda. Thanks to Coco. Thanks to all of you. It's so nice to look around the Zoom, see so many friendly faces who have supported us and some new faces. And I'm really looking forward to the sort of town hall aspect of this, a little bit of a community conversation. So I would love to chat, but let me spend a few minutes just sort of talking about why it's so important to me to be a progressive candidate for Attorney General. The progressive community has been very central to my identity in public service. I was so honored to have the support of both Progressive Massachusetts and the Progressive Dems of Massachusetts in my run for Lieutenant Governor, and I pledge to be a rock solid progressive as Attorney General. I just want to spend a few minutes sort of talking about why I think the Attorney General is so important in this moment in American history. So as a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the Attorney General can have as the people's lawyer on people's lives. So during the Trump administration, of course, we saw the AG fight back again and again and again against a corrupt and immoral president. But even with Trump out of power, we need the Attorney General to focus on the really big challenges of our time: racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy, attacks on workers' rights, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, student loan debt, housing instability, gun violence. We have so much important work to do. And the pandemic has shown clearly how important it is to have a healthcare system that works for everyone. I believe it's time for a single payer, Medicare for all system right here in Massachusetts. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the AG office at the time that we were implementing Massachusetts health reform. We worked really hard to make sure that everyone had access to high quality, affordable healthcare. I sued some big insurance companies who are taking advantage of Massachusetts residents during that critical time. I think one of the main roles of the Attorney General is to stand up for consumers to identify vulnerabilities, vulnerable populations, racial disparities, stand up against big pharmaceutical companies like Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, whose lies brought us the opioid crisis that's been so devastating across the state. I also think the AG can play a really big role in making sure that we have an economy that works for everyone. I had the great honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness. On day one of the Biden-Harris administration, I joined as the acting general counsel of the Department of Commerce, led a team of several hundred lawyers, and helped to launch the Build Back Better agenda. Our economy needs to work for everyone, not just the ultra-rich, not just wealthy corporations. We need an AG who will stand up for working people. We need to fight back against wage theft, against Uber and Lyft trying to misclassify workers and take away their benefits. We need to pass the Fair Share Amendment to ask the wealthy to pay a little more so we can invest in transportation and in education. Today, I was honored to receive the endorsement of IBAW 2222, and I pledge to be a strong workers' champion as AG. We also need to make sure, as Zelda mentioned, that every child in Massachusetts gets a world-class education. Look, we're more than 68 years after Brown versus Board of Education, but our schools are still separate and unequal. Where you live and the color of your skin should not determine what kind of an education your children get. The AG needs to take on educational injustice as the civil rights crisis that it is. And I strongly disagree that expanding charter schools is the way to do that. That just undermines teachers, siphons away money, picks winners and losers. We need to invest in our communities, in our schools, in high quality preschool and daycare, and make sure that all children across the state get the start in life that they deserve. And we finally need to make higher education free for everyone. The AG can also bring new urgency to the fight against racial injustice. The murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system. And there's an urgent need for Massachusetts to do more on police accountability, including getting rid of qualified immunity that unfairly gets in the way of justice for victims of police brutality. We also need an AG who will finally bring much needed oversight to the state police. The AG can also bring urgency to the fight against climate change. This is going to determine what kind of a life our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren lead. We need an AG who believes in the Green New Deal and will make climate a top priority. We need an AG who will stand up for reproductive rights with Roe versus Wade hanging on by a thread in the US Supreme Court under attack all across the country. We need an AG who will stand up for LGBTQ rights at a time when the Texas AG is trying to classify gender-affirming care as child abuse, when the Florida legislature is attacking LGBTQ youth in our schools. We need an AG who will stand up for sensible gun control, for affordable housing, for finally getting student debt relief. I've spent much of my career fighting for voting rights. I led a team of 4,000 lawyers for the Obama campaign in Ohio in 2008. Last year, I founded a national voter protection organization called the Voter Protection Corps. And our democracy is quite literally under attack. An armed mob stormed our Capitol as they were in the process of trying to usher in a peaceful transition of power. With Mitch McConnell and Joe Manchin blocking meaningful action at the national level, we need to lead right here at home. We need to finally pass election day registration, make vote by mail permanent, have early voting for all elections. But we also need to make our government work better. We need to make our governor's office and our legislature more transparent. We need to get special interest money out of our politics. We're now at a point in this race where there are actually distinctions in policy between the candidates for AG. And I want to make it clear that I'm going to be an AG who stands up for Medicare for all, for a single payer healthcare system, who will fight to eliminate qualified immunity, who will fight against the expansion of charter schools, and has the direct experience to lead in this office on day one. I know we're going to be up against millions of dollars in special interest money. I am aware that there are a number of Beacon Hill endorsements that have gone to another candidate, but endorsements and special interest money aren't going to determine the outcome of this election. I'm so proud to have more than 215 grassroots leaders all across the state and every state Senate district supporting this campaign. That's what's going to allow us to win this race. We need an AG who is independent, who will stand up who will fight for working people, who will fight for democracy, because that's what the people's lawyer does. And that's the kind of AG I'm going to be. So I'm really pleased to have this conversation with you. I would love to earn your support, and I need your help. I need your help to amplify our message, to build our grassroots organization within the progressive movement in every community, on social media. And if you're on our team, I would love to work with you and my team to get that message out.
Thank you so much. So at this point, we've done a lot of talking, and you've heard why Quentin is the most progressive candidate for this office, and why we need your help. But we need to hear from you as well. So now is the fun part where we get to answer your questions. You get to ask them, and we get to open up the conversation and bring these ideas and thoughts with us as we move up to the AG's office. So if you want to type it in the chat, feel free to type it in the chat. Ben will be watching. And for those questions, if you want to raise your hand, we're happy to call on you, and you can ask it yourself, but we would just really love to hear from you, whether it's a question for Quentin or about the campaign, or just some information. Oh, I see Marcia has her hand raised, so we will go to Marcia Finkelstein. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I just had to unmute.
No problem.
Quentin, you
Hi,
know I
Marcia.
have mad love for you. Like I've known you for a bunch of years now, and there's no one better. I say this with as a progressive, a pragmatic progressive. You know, we all know, whether we like to talk about it or not, that you know, who wins in a primary, you have to be attractive to a wide variety of people that are going to pull a Democratic ballot. So you got the progressive bona fides, right? How are you going to? What's your message to people that may be more moderate? That, you know, what kind of things have you been experiencing that they've been talking to you about? I think it's important for us to just look at the electorate in a bigger way, because there's not enough progressives, and you know, with all the candidates. And I just want us to make sure, because you got my support. I'm going to be busting my butt for you. I just want to make sure, like, we're having these conversations, because no vote can be left on the table. We have to go for every single vote.
So thank you for that question, Marcia. Look, I think that voters across Massachusetts, certainly in the primary electorate, care a lot about high quality healthcare. They care a lot about some of the consumer protection problems raised by pharmaceutical costs, by insurance, by some of the ways that the healthcare system has not worked for us during the pandemic, during the opioid crisis. And so I think that my experience as a healthcare leader is one that will translate very well in the broader electorate. I think everybody, or large portions of voters, care a lot about high quality education. And so I think talking about healthcare, talking about education, talking about jobs, trying to make the economy work for everyone, trying to talk about taking on the climate crisis and leading on our democracy. I think these are messages that are going to be successful. The other thing that I think I've done really well as a candidate, both in the LG race and in the beginning phases of this, is really to have a meaningfully statewide organization. I think that we need to meet voters where they are and build a broad coalition. And I think that we do. I think you're entirely right, Marcia, that we need to be inclusive of Democrats who are not as progressive, but we need to do that without compromising our values and our policy ideas.
Awesome. Thank you. So I saw another hand raised. Vince Dixon, you are up. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Quentin, Vince Dixon, I met you a couple times years ago. Your parents were wonderful people, I believe, masters of Adam's House.
Yes, that's right. Up until last year, they've now retired down to the Cape.
Great. They used
It's nice to see you again.
they used to speak at morning prayers about once a year and always brought some wonderful insights. Two things that I think are important that I don't hear a lot of people, even progressives, talk about antitrust, the antitrust powers of the Attorney General. I'm in Winchester now, and Article 31 of our town meeting was passed. That's a communications study committee to look at the fact that the local newspapers, weeklies, and others are diminishing. And one of the things here was the wicked local chain, the community newspapers, the Gatehouse is now merged with USA Today and gone private, more or less. Consumer and local policy coverage has dropped precipitously for everybody, whether it's town government in towns where a lot of people come here and move into and don't understand local government. And in many cases, serious issues. We just had a town election here in Winchester where a Trump type slate ran a number of candidates, and there was very little coverage, pro or con, except through social media, not accurate. Would you, as Attorney General, look at the use of antitrust, because this is something that has damaged both consumer interest and the public policy issues?
Thank you so much for that question, Vincent. It's terrific on two levels. So first, I do think that the AG has a powerful platform to use our antitrust laws for consumer benefit. I have some direct experience with this. When I was in the AG office, I led a multi-state case against some big insurance companies in what's called the excess casualty industry in the bid rigging and price fixing context. And that led to a $175 million national settlement with a large insurance company. So I have some direct experience using the antitrust law. We also, as the chief of the healthcare division, spent a lot of time focusing on our antitrust and nonprofit charities oversight functions with respect to consolidation in both the healthcare provider world and the insurance world. So this is a set of powers that I think the AG has and can use for consumer benefit in a number of different spaces. And as you say, corporations are consolidating, wealth is consolidating, economic inequality is one of the sort of great challenges of this moment in history. You mentioned one area where that consolidation is quite troubling, and that's the area of local journalism. And this is something that's causing an enormous amount of public harm. A lot of the spread of viral disinformation, some of the things that are corrupting, including our democracy online and in cable news, are enabled by the diminishing power of local voices and local journalism. So there are a number of different efforts to try to rebuild local journalism, and familiar with some of the philanthropic and some of the government efforts, would love to use the powers of the Attorney General's office to try to be part of the solution to that sort of impoverishment of our democratic discourse in local journalism. I'd love to think with you what some creative ways we can use the AG's office to solve that set of problems, because I think our democracy is in real trouble. And one piece of that is that the information environment is becoming much more emaciated. And I think we need to work on how to rebuild local journalism to help counter that.
I'm glad to hear that. One other, so I'll follow that up with you at some point. One other thing was the police certification process that came up recently, which is a reform process. I noted that if you're a teacher and you're certified, you don't get to be superintendent of schools. And if you're a police officer, you do get to be police chief. And I filed legislation that would actually have a separate certification for police chiefs. I'm wondering, as Attorney General, what you think of that, and whether that's something you'd be interested in following up further on.
I'd love to talk more about that, actually. I thought you were going in a different direction with that question. And the issue you brought up is one I'd like to learn more about. I did put out a statement over the last couple of days about a different kind of consolidation of information about police officers who have been sanctioned or otherwise information that chiefs have about police officers who have either been involved in deception or corruption of evidence, and how we can make sure that it's easier for criminal defendants to get access to that information, for the public to get access to that information. But that seems to be a different question from what you're raising. So I'd love for you to educate me a little bit more on the certification process for the
Just very briefly, the Harvard police chief is an example of that, the one that the Harvard Crimson exposed. He basically was a failed police officer early in his career and somehow slipped a couple of loopholes and became police chief instead, and was a disaster as a police chief for 25 years, not functioning as a police officer, which he was a failure at. So recognizing basically that the superintendent of schools is managerial and has to follow and order the law to be followed separately from a teacher, much the same way bad police officers often become powerful police chiefs or police commissioners. And that's something I talked to Senator Jalen about it, and she said, I don't think we had thought about that. So I will follow that up with you.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. I'd love to learn more and keep talking about how we can help.
Great. Regards to your parents if you get a chance, and I will follow up. And I know Ari Taylor well, and Michelle and a couple other people here. So we'll follow up further. Thank you very much for running.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat, but before we go to that, there's a lot of chatter in the chat about your cat and cats in general. So if you get a chance to show the cat and intro the cat at some point, that would be wonderful.
I let her out because she was clearly, that was clearly what we call it, in Lassie, the like Timmy's down the well. She likes to come up to me and talk. We have two. That one was May May, and the other is Marley. So they're new to us. They're 1-year-old kittens. We just lost about 6 months ago the cat Little Bear that we've had for 16 years. So but we have two young kittens. So
I think our next town hall, they need to be included on it, and we are definitely going to look into a cats for Quentin. So if you have a cat, post it on Facebook, hashtag Quentin for AG. Make sure everybody knows that, everybody, even the cats, are for Quentin. So there is, I'm going to go to Ben for a question. And then James, I do see your hand raised. We're just going to go to the question that was in the chat. And Ben is going to read that one out. And we'll kind of toggle back and forth for a little bit. So go ahead, Ben.
So I have a question from Susan in the chat. That was, there's a misapprehension that the AG's office doesn't have anything to do with our schools or with the funding of equitable public education. Can you address that?
So the constitutional provision in the Massachusetts Constitution that requires the state to provide free and appropriate public education is actually an affirmative obligation on the part of the government to do that. Most of the time when the Constitution says that the government should not do something, it's usually a negative thing. So, Congress will make no law infringing the freedom of speech. The educational thing actually creates a duty on the part of the state to make sure that every kid has access to a high quality education. And so as the chief civil rights officer in the Commonwealth, the blatant racial disparities and socioeconomic and geographic disparities in the education system have got to be something that's an urgent priority. And I see this as multiple problems. So one piece of this problem is funding disparities. So the number of resources that are devoted to the kids in the public school system my children go to are significantly higher than the number of resources that are devoted to kids in Brockton and in Southbridge and in Lawrence and parts of Worcester and parts of Boston and other places that have had test scores that are lower and other kinds of differences in outcomes. But we also have deeply racially segregated schools and communities. And if you sort of think about the set of sort of constitutional injustices that Brown versus Board of Education was meant to remedy, it was very much the kind of circumstance that we still see today. And I think that there's a little bit of a feeling in Massachusetts, or at least on Beacon Hill, that we sort of did education reform, that there were improvements to the equitable distribution of resources, and sort of check. We feel that way a little bit about criminal justice reform as well, that we sort of did that in 2018 and move on to other things. And I think it's very hard to look at what's happening in some of our school districts and feel that that is what's going on there. We have massive disparities, and we need to take them on with some urgency. Now, there's also some specific instances, and I think somebody mentioned some of the accountability issues in some of the charter schools and some of the some of the sort of specific instances where the AG and other folks can intervene. So I think there's some specific circumstances where we need to stand up for particular sets of students and make sure that there's accountability in the school system. But I think more broadly, we need to recognize the injustices in the overall structure and take them on with some urgency.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to James, who had his hand raised, and then there's another one in the chat. So again, going back and forth. James, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I just did. Thank you very much. Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you. I have to admit that I'm a Mass native, that I returned to Massachusetts after being away for many years, about 3 years ago. So I just missed your last campaign. It's nice to meet you. But what I've been doing for the past few years is working on campaigns up and down the East Coast, including in 2018, helping to flip a seat in South Florida to blue. So last summer, what I was working on was in West Virginia, talking to voters to support the For the People Act. And obviously, we were not successful in getting that passed, but I wonder, you know, voting rights is a very important issue for me. Massachusetts seems to be fairly safe, but are there is there any danger of, you know, voting rights coming under attack in Massachusetts, and what can we do to be proactive to prevent that from happening?
Thanks so much, James, and thanks for your work on this issue. This has been one of the issues that I've spent a good deal of my career on. Let me first touch on the national picture and then talk a little bit about Massachusetts. So on the national level, it's just shocking to me that Joe Biden on Martin Luther King Day went to John Lewis's hometown and demanded that the filibuster be amended to allow the John Lewis Act and the For the People Act to move forward, and was still rebuffed by every Republican member of Congress, Mitch McConnell, Joe Manchin, and Kirsten Sinema. And so I think that where that leaves us at the moment is that the project of rebuilding our democracy will primarily take place in the states and at the grassroots level. And Massachusetts has this sort of wonderful tradition of leadership on so many other areas, equal marriage, universal access to care. You can go back in our history, we've been a leader in a lot of things. We are not a leader in democracy at all. We do not have election day registration, which is something that's worked in 20 states and the District of Columbia. We disenfranchise lots of young people, people of color, people move around a lot based on arbitrary voter registration cutoff. And as of this moment, we don't have vote by mail. We don't have early voting for all elections. So there are lots of ways, just sort of in the brass tack sense, that Massachusetts needs to act with urgency to even catch up with the baseline. But I think that the bigger problem is that our democracy doesn't function very well at the level of accountability of Beacon Hill. So we cannot access the records of the governor. We cannot access the records of the legislature. We have not had enough oversight of our elections and our campaigns. And there's a ton of special interest money that determines the outcomes of a lot of elections. So I think we've got a lot of work to do right here at home to make our democracy work better. And this is at a time when public trust in government is at a low ebb. And so I think that the AG office can play a much more vigorous role in helping to rebuild our democracy.
Thank you.
Thank
James,
you very much.
Thank you for that question. And thank you for all the questions that have been coming in. We have one more in the chat. Feel free to keep asking. We have the room until 8:30. Happy to answer any questions. And again, feel free to send any questions in. If you think of something later, you can always email the campaign. Check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, on our website. But I'm going to go to Ben to answer this next question.
So this is a question from Michelle. She read about the Governor's Council being reluctant to keep their meetings remote and open to the public on Zoom. As Attorney General, would you have oversight on transparency in the State House?
So interesting to me that, I think that the pandemic has had so many awful impacts on every aspect of our life, but we have learned some things. And one of the things that is really interesting is to sort of think about how we can use this kind of a format to make government more accessible to people who can't necessarily make it to a meeting at a particular time in a particular place. And this happens a lot in municipal government, and certainly happens with Governor's Council and other entities where if you have a job or maybe multiple jobs, you have caregiving responsibilities, you're looking after an elderly relative, you're looking after your kids, you can't necessarily be at a particular place at a particular time. And that skews the set of people who can impact local government, impact and watch statewide entities. And so I'd like to sort of be creative in thinking about how we can think about this differently on the post-pandemic side. Can we allow more people to access these meetings? Can we make sure that you can see them afterwards and to have a period of time to be able to comment on what you see? So I think there's some things that we've learned about the ways that technology can make government more accessible that might allow us to do things even better after we eventually open up, our government, and certainly in a world where the pandemic is very much still happening and where people still have risks that health, and certainly with immunocompromised people and people who are not eligible for vaccines or for whom vaccines don't work, we're going to need to use these flexibilities going forward. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And the backdrop of this is a government that is deeply untransparent. We rank very poorly in terms of transparency, and that's for a reason. It's very cynically in order to block access to our government. And an example of this is roll call votes in the House of Representatives. Where under a lot of circumstances, you just can't know how your representative voted on a particular measure because they don't want you to know. Because if you knew, you could hold them accountable for doing what their constituents wanted. So we got to do more to open up our government.
Thank you. I am checking the chat to see if we're have any more coming in. I don't see any hands raised. Let me just go through quickly. Should we play another song? Anybody need a minute? So our email, our phones, access to this campaign is always available. We want to make sure that we're really hearing from you, from your organizations, anyone out there that, what's important to them and how we can really move this forward. And on the same note, we really need your help as well. Oh, wait, there's more questions. I love it. So I see Leslie hasn't asked a question yet, so I'm going to go to her first, and then James and Zelda, you two are next. So Leslie, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for doing this, Quentin. I am wondering what you see as let me actually backtrack a little bit. Right now, Massachusetts is trying to, or several people in Massachusetts are trying to get the gas industry to, we're trying to get the gas industry to revamp and not pollute the air anymore with gas. And I wonder what the government agencies seem to be trying to legislate gas into our future forever. And I wonder if you see a role for the Attorney General in combating this effort by government agencies to help out the gas industry.
I do think so, Leslie, and I would love to learn from you specific suggestions that you have. But look, first, we need to transition to truly renewable sources of energy. There are no bridges to that. We need to get away from fossil fuels. We need to go to renewable sources of energy. And the Baker administration has been deeply interwoven with fossil fuel interests. So the instrumentalities of the Baker government have been too often cozy with those entities. And so I do think that the AG has a big role in the energy sector in trying to usher in a transition to truly renewable sources of energy as one of the players in that conversation. Certainly, the legislature is now taking on some important questions around wind energy, but I think that we can do a much better job of overseeing some of the partnerships with industry, particularly within the DPU, and the AG has a big role to play in that. I also just think that the AG can be a powerful voice in fighting for climate more broadly. So when I was in the Biden administration on day one, President Biden issued an executive order on the climate in which it essentially said, no matter what you're doing, you may be the Secretary of Labor, you may be the Secretary of Agriculture, you may be doing small business work, regardless of what you do, climate needs to be a priority in your work, and you need to identify opportunities to move forward and opportunities or places where you're part of the problem and remedy them. And I think that's the right way to sort of think about the AG's role here, and something that I would seek to replicate on day one as AG. We have the set of powers that everybody thinks of when they think of the AG enforcing anti-pollution laws. So the AG brought Massachusetts versus EPA. It was a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case. Maura Healey sued ExxonMobil for lying, sued the Trump administration a bunch of times. There's lots of stuff that you can do directly, but there's also a huge role in the types of questions that you're talking about, Leslie, in terms of transition to a clean energy future. There's oversight of utilities. There's civil rights opportunities because, as we know, the climate crisis is going to hit communities of color most profoundly, already is. And then there are lots of opportunities to advance climate goals when we're advising and counseling and defending U.S. government, Massachusetts government entities. Sometimes in the defensive posture and the counseling posture, you actually have the most opportunities to move the climate agenda forward. And then there's just simply the bully pulpit, right? The AG, Zelda was talking about protesting Holtec and the decommissioning of the power plant and the radioactive water going to the Cape Cod Bay. You can stand up and protest that. There may be some opportunities for the AG to intervene directly, but there also is the bully pulpit. On Joint Base Cape Cod, they're trying to put a machine gun range there. It's going to pollute the water. There are many better alternatives. The AG can say so. The AG can say that we object to the compressor station in Weymouth. There's just lots of opportunities, I think, for the AG to be a public voice for urgency in the climate conversation.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you so much. So I think it was James and then Zelda, and nothing in the chat. So we'll go with James and then Zelda.
Okay, by the way, people call me Jim, just so y'all know.
Oh,
But in that time, James only if I'm in trouble. But anyway, what I wanted to tell y'all, early in my career, I worked as a reporter, and I can think of two specific stories that I could tell you about ways that transparency really had an important effect on local government here in Massachusetts. One of them was I used to write for the Athol Daily News in Worcester County, and they had a board of selectmen there who had been there forever, and they were, shall we say, very comfortable in their roles. And frankly, they were pretty nasty people. They were treating the voters with a lot of contempt. And when people came into their meetings, they were downright rude to them. Well, what happened was the voters decided to start televising select board meetings. And all of a sudden, the voters in the community got to see how their elected leaders were treating their fellow citizens. And over the course of 3 years, they replaced every one of those selectmen with people who were much more public servants than power-hungry people that were there before. So that's, I would be very suspicious about any government entity, governance council or otherwise, that would not want to have their meetings on Zoom. Okay, so that's one story. The other one that's a personal favorite of mine that I was actually involved with, I actually uncovered a selectman in the town of Charlemont who was, to this day, and I've been around a long time, I'm 54, the most dishonest politician I've ever met. And just by reporting on what he was saying in select board meetings, the year after I moved on to another newspaper, he got voted out of office. And people said it was my coverage of the town of Charlemont that people realized this guy was not doing a service to the people. So anyone who would fight against having any of our proceedings, not televised, I would be very suspicious and probably want to look into what they're actually up to.
Sunshine's a wonderful disinfectant.
Like the Washington Post says, democracy dies in darkness.
Jim, thank you so much again. I appreciate, I love that everybody's getting involved and there's questions and we can have these open discussions. And so I am going to go to Zelda, who's been waiting, and take it away with a question. Oh, did we lose?
It was me. I was the one who forgot to unmute herself. Everybody mark that off on your bingo card for the night. I will cede my time to Zaida if she wants to go, but I don't see her hand up anymore. I was just going to say, Quentin, I brought it up and you brought it up even after my hand was raised, but the situation in Plymouth, and obviously it's not just Plymouth, it's Cape Cod Bay, and nuclear issues being not like located in a bubble. And also I know that in Malden, and there are people on this call who would be able to speak to this better than I can, with lead in the drinking water, with the gun range on Cape Cod. Again, like I said in the chat, come and choose between your gun water or your radioactive water in beautiful Cape Cod. But like, what are the things that an AG who feels like wading into it and being aggressive about things like this can do, both in a municipal situation where you've got like lead in the water, or when you're dealing with the feds with, a gun range at an Air Force base or an effing weapon on the coast of New England, as we call it, Pilgrim nuke, even decommissioned, is terrifying and will be a waste of for hundreds of years, obviously. So that's a long, stupid question, and that's how I am going out.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, Zelda. I mean, I think the AG office has a huge range of powers, and its complexity is part of its strength. And I think what you need to be able to do is figure out how to use the appropriate lever to fix the particular problem. So sometimes, as you say, it's interacting with federal government agencies with respect to some of the nuclear energy issues. There are a lot of federal state interactions that come into play, and that gives you an opportunity for advocacy at that level. Sometimes there are contractual provisions. In the question of Holtec, there's actually some licensing provisions that may be appropriate and germane to that question. There's also federal state preemption questions that come into play. But then there's also just straight power politics. And I think people underestimate the importance of saying that something is wrong from a platform that people are likely to listen to. The AG has a lot of political power and can use that power to make certain bad decisions difficult. And I think that we ought to use the platform of the AG office to urgently push for solutions to the climate crisis, to racial justice, for our democracy. So where there's not a direct responsibility, but it's a really important thing, sometimes you can make a big impact that way as well. So anyway, I wanted to say that I know we're sort of getting up towards the hour, and I sort of wanted to mention something that I really believe in, that I think is germane to this group, which is what I think of as relational organizing. I think we've all been involved in campaigns that mail it in on interacting with activists and voters, that sort of have their focus groups and their mass emails and their robocalls and their texts, and like that's the core of the campaign. That is not what I want to have as the core of our campaign. I want the core of our campaign to be the kind of energy we have on this call and in our progressive organizations and in our community democratic organizations. And part of the reason I think that we wanted to pull this group together it was to ask for your help with progressive organizations and with local organizations. I want to make the case that this is the progressive campaign for AG. And I would love to have your help making that case over the next few weeks as a number of progressive organizations consider their endorsements, as delegates start to really think about the policy questions and the differences between the candidates in this race. And I say this respectfully to my opponents, who I respect a great deal. There are actual policy differences in this campaign. And we are starting to see the ways that we look differently at the powers of the Attorney General and what the Attorney General should do with the office. And I would be so grateful if you agree with my vision, if you could help me to make that case in the community of progressives that I think of as one of my core constituencies. So part of what I'm asking for, honestly, is your help making that case.
Thank you. I want to really thank everybody for being here tonight. And I hope you got a little bit of insight into just what an amazing campaign this is to be on, and where we are and where we're going, and how much fun it is and what the energy is like here. And we hope that you'll come on board and add to this energy and help us spread it all over Massachusetts. A $5 donation goes a long way. The link is in there. But what would be even better is having you on our team, having you help us raise those donations, a house party now that the summer is here or it's coming, outdoor events where we can safely, socially, distantly be together, be talking, and really bring this energy all over Massachusetts. Zaida just said 5 friends. If you can, $5, 5 friends, high fives for everybody. It's going to be a great next 5 months because we're almost in April. And we really hope that you'll join us, that you'll be here with us. And we really hope that you got a feel for why we're supporting Quentin, why this is a real deal campaign, and, why we're going to make it to the AG's office. And thank you so much for being here tonight.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good to see y'all.
Thank you all for doing this. This was great. Thank you, Quentin, Zelda, everyone else.
Thank you.
Michelle.